Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Atomic Mass Transmissions Live. I'm Will Schick, Director of Product Development for Atomic Mass Games, and today we're going to be painting the Black Widow from the upcoming Earth's Mightiest Marvel Crisis Protocol core set. So with that said, let's get going, because we've kind of got two characters to paint today. We've got an Ultron bot that's getting knee-kicked in the face, and we've got the one and only Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow. So last week, if you were with me for the stream, we did Red Skull, Master of the World, and we did him in his classic black leather. So I thought today, instead of doing Black Widow in black, we would instead mix it up and do the white suit Black Widow. That was made so popular and iconic, I mean, in a lot of places, but really I would say the Black Widow movie that came out, goodness gracious, how long ago was that? A long time ago, it feels like at this point. And we just do the white suit version today because it gives us an excuse to work on our whites and do something a little different. So many heroes and villains get stuck in that black outfit kind of like feel, so just lets us do something a little more interesting and unique. So I'm just going to start by laying down a nice little pre-glaze of faded ultramarine from the Monument paint line series. So we're going to use a little bit of like a lavenderish purple for our white undertones, and we'll build up from there. But this will just kind of like really quickly give us that chromatic shadow and give our paint a little something to build off of with our whites. As we've talked about before, when you're painting white, you don't want to paint a lot of white. You actually want to paint a lot of almost whites or off whites. And the choice of off white that you choose, whether it's a yellow or a blue or a purple or a green, is just kind of up to you. But at the end of the day, you're going to use very little actual white when painting white, just for like the most extreme highlights and such. And then otherwise, you're mostly going to be painting with those off whites, those semi-white colors that you mix in. So using this faded ultramarine, we're just going to kind of like build up over a couple different layers until we get to our pure white, and that will hopefully give us the appearance of a cool white kind of winter jumpsuit like we see in some of those promotional images, and then we've seen like from other places. When and where can you get some of the good? Well, right now the only way to get AMG swag is to work for AMG. So every holiday season, every December around Christmas time, we usually, as a studio, wind up gifting some kind of AMG branded apparel or thing to folks in the studio as kind of like a thank you, a marker of the year, as it were. So because we live in the Pacific Northwest and hoodies are super useful, we've done hoodies a few times now, 3 times I think. And of course we've done like the classic coffee mugs and coffee tumblers and all that, but yeah, no merch store yet. I don't actually know who you would talk to about that currently, but somebody maybe. All right, I'm just going to quickly knock out this Ultron bot because I want that blue glaze some time to set up. Oh, my mini extravaganza Vader and oils. If he was here, I'd show him to you, but he's not. I think I have the other one that I did in oils, though. Somewhere. Maybe. Is he in this box? Oh, he got moved. I'll bring it back in the next time we do a Star Wars painting stream and show him off.
What color are you using for the Ultron bot right now?
This is Monument's Dark Steel, right? Dark Steel? Yeah, Dark Silver, not steel. Dark Silver. And I'm not going to spend a lot of my effort on this Ultron bot, but I figured we'll get at least a little bit of paint on him just to get him going. But one of the things with the Monument series is that they don't have a ton of metallics, or at least a lot of metallic silvers. So your options are pretty limited to dark silver and silver. They do have a metallic, like a metal metallic or a metallic medium that you can use to mix into other colors, so that can be useful, but you should expect to do a little bit of mixing if you want to make some nice silvers. But yeah, I took most of the mini Stravaganza stuff home and have been working on finishing it, or did finish it and just haven't based it. I'm really bad when it comes to getting things on final bases. If I don't have a game scheduled with it, the basing's like the very, very last thing I ever do. So I have a number of minis in general from all the different game lines that are sitting completed except for their bases, and I should be better about it. But I'm not, because I find completing bases to be a chore. I don't know why. I don't like it. I should get Tony to do it. Just hand it off and be like, Tony, base this. He wouldn't have a choice. It's his job. And then Dallas would be like, why do you keep making Tony waste all his time basing your stuff? And I'm like, I don't know, because I can. And I don't like basing. It's not my joy. It's not my joy. All right. What's in here? Yeah, like for me, the way that I approach basing now is I will just dedicate a hobby session and I will knock out as many bases as I can. So I usually try to batch at least 20 bases at once. And I find that doing them all at once rather than individually, not only does it keep the basing scheme a bit more consistent, but like I love the feeling of completing a miniature, cracking it off of its like little painting cup stand or temp base, and then just gluing it immediately to the finished base and being like, I'm done. You know, taking off that kind of pressure of knowing that, oh, I'm completed, but I still have to do the base. Kind of ruins the moment. Whereas with that technique, for me, it gives me that instant satisfaction of feeling like, yes, it is complete. It goes right on the shelf. Everyone's happy. And we get to move on to the next one. And then when the game does show up and, you know, I'm scheduled to go play a game, whether at my kitchen table or wherever else, I don't all of a sudden look at it and be like, oh, shoot, I have to finish a base for this in the next hour. Because I totally didn't do that when I should have. Yee. But that's been my go-to trick now, is I just crank them out all at once. So I should just give Tony like 40 bases and be like, finish these all. See? We're getting there. We're making it happen. Making it alive. Just base this pistol grip really quick in some silver. Call that good. I just glue to the base usually. I don't find that not pinning is a problem, so yeah, I don't usually pin, but you do sometimes want to think about like scraping a little bit of the paint off the foot of your miniature or extra glue if you glued it to a temp base, and then doing a little scuffing on the finished painted base once you figure out where the mini is going to go. That can be really important, for sure. Need a little bit more medium in this. It's a little too heavy. All right, we're just going to start knocking in these. Now it's kind of like, what is this? Blue, white? White, blue? I don't remember what the name. Yeah, white, blue. very straightforward. So we'll just kind of start working this stuff in, and again, building over that initial glaze base that we did. And we'll cover most of that, and that'll be fine. But we're still going to get that undertone painting, and we have a few layers to go. But I might leave that faded ultramarine showing in like the deepest cracks and crevices or in the deep shadows. But for the most part, you know, those all whites are pretty translucent. They're not super opaque, and that's one of the struggles when painting something that you want to be very white, is that it's going to take a lot of coats and all that stuff. So doing that quick little underpainting can really help with how many coats you have to put down, and it kind of blends everything together as you work your way up, because your paint is always going to show what's underneath it. No paint is purely opaque. There's a lot that are fairly opaque. But having that little bit of underpainting to it, it makes everything work just so much better and smoother when it comes to your final look of your miniature and everything. So it's definitely a step that if you're working on a weak pigment color, yellow, red, orange, white, it can really pay out dividends if you take the time to do it. And it doesn't take very long, obviously, like you saw here. I just did a really quick glaze, and that was plenty. And now I can just build up my colors over that. And it allows fewer coats to work out better as well, because again, we kind of have our shade right there. But it doesn't stop me from going even higher or ignoring the whole thing. And you can do the same idea with an airbrush as well. In fact, it works really well with the airbrush. If you watch Mini Strav, we used the airbrush quite a bit when I was painting, but layering down some really good chromatic undertones, because the airbrush also is very translucent in its applications, can make a huge difference in the final look and how much work you have to do to make your colors look right. So grab a color wheel and take a look at what your natural shade tones are, what your progression is going to be, and build up a good foundation with your shadow colors using the airbrush. And then you can kind of like glaze or wash or even highlight on paint like we're doing here, and it will look so much better. So it's those little like tricksy artist steps to make the colors work for you that can make the huge difference. And of course, painting with an airbrush is my favorite way to do it, because the airbrush application usually comes out a lot smoother. It takes less finesse with the brush and all of that good stuff, fewer layers. You have a lot more control as you get used to the airbrush over how heavy or opaque your colors are. So you just get a cleaner look. So whenever I'm painting something that's predominantly white, I'll use the airbrush. To lay down my undertones and then my initial layers. And then if I'm doing a wash over top of that, I'll lay down my wash, then I'll go back in and I'll reclaim the highlight areas with the airbrush again. So if you're one of those people who's like, I want to paint a lot of white, I recommend looking into airbrushing. But you can obviously do anything with a brush as well. It just takes a little bit more time and patience and practice. And the end results will be a little different, but that's going to be your technique and your style, and that's one of the cool things about painting, is you develop all that yourself. I'm just using that exact same mix, and now we're just building up our layers by color, or our coverage by layers. But one of the big things that I want to be careful of is I don't want my brush strokes to be super visible, so I have to watch that even though that white color is on the palette, you know, these colors have a tendency to get really chunky on you. So I'm going to use that glaze medium, that wash medium, and a little bit of wetness on my brush to make sure that my paint stays really fluid and smooth, and that will hopefully avoid any major brush stroke lines or anything like that. It won't obviously fix all of it, but it should help with most of it. And that's just another reality of using these weaker pigment colors like white or yellow or orange, is you really have to work with thinner than normal layers. And if you don't, that's when you're going to start to really see those brush strokes and kind of see that chunkiness, that grittiness that comes out with some of those colors. Because if you go too thick with your paint, or you don't let the coverage be smooth and subtle, you get those big differentiations in contrast and value. And that can be a style choice, but most of the time I think the vast majority of us want to avoid that. So again, it's an exercise in patience and just perseverance in making sure that you build up those layers appropriately. And again, this kind of goes back to the value of the airbrush, right? Is that you can do these layers much, much quicker. Than you can with the normal brush, but it is possible to achieve any of this with the handy dandy brush. Think about where we want those colors. And for me, it's almost like you're working with glazes. They're thicker, they're a bit more thick or like heavier bodied than glazes, but I always kind of think of like glaze consistency when I'm doing these kind of brighter colors. And if I keep that in mind, then it makes sure that I'm always going back and adding that extra bit of moisture to the paint, making sure that it's loose and flowy, and I avoid suddenly winding up in a spot where I have a really gross and chunky looking brush stroke or something. Or that. Glazing the top of those arms where the light would be hitting. Pulling that color down, through. And one of the things to think about when you're doing this too is that wherever you pull the paint to, especially when it's thin like this, that's where it's going to get strongest. So you can use your brush strokes to kind of help with the process as well. If you want your color to be most opaque at a certain point, make sure you're pulling the paint in that direction. If you want it to be weaker in a certain spot, then pull away from that spot, like start your paint there and pull down or pull away. Keep going with it. See, Dallas is in there answering questions about the Worthy. Very excited to see what this year's competition holds for us. We had some amazing entries from last year at the inaugural event. And if you missed Dallas and Tony talking about the Worthy and kind of going through the entries and discussion about them and everything, you can check that out on the YouTube channel. See, now I've made a little bit of a mistake here, so go through and fix that. Give that section a little bit more time to dry because we've peeled our paint off, but we'll fix it. So this is the one thing to be aware of when you're doing this, is if you overwork an area or you go too fast, you wind up doing what I did, which is pull up some of your paint. And if you do that, don't freak out. You can fix it, but you have to let the area kind of set up better before you try to go back in and adjust it. So it's not an immediate thing that you can address right away. Give it a little bit of time, go somewhere else on the mini, work on that portion, and then come back to it later. But no different than when we work with like washes or contrasts or anything like that, you know. There's going to be that magical like in-between time where the paint goes from workable and wet to unworkable and wet. And sometimes you'll get caught by that. So just pay attention to what you're doing, how the paint's going on with the brush and everything. And if you notice that you're peeling paint away and it doesn't seem to be successful, just give that area a bit of a rest, a chance to set up better, and then you can go back in and fix the area where you might have like pulled paint away or anything like that. And all the good stuff. It's not the end of the world. It can be fixed, but you got to give it time to set up so you can go back in and fix it. I think we're pretty good here. So I've done several layers of this kind of like first glaze highlight with the white. We're going to come back in here and we're going to mix up a little bit. Darker color. So we can work up this area. All right, so we're going to do that. I'll let that dry, and then we can come back in and rebuild up that highlight. So with that in mind, let's jump away from the suit just to give that some time to dry. We'll come in here, let's do our skin tone really quick. initial base for our flesh tone. And all I did here was I took the beige red and natural skin, what is that called? Advanced flesh tone from the Monument series, and I kind of mixed them together. Personally, I don't like any of the Monument flesh tones like directly out of the pot, so I always kind of grab a couple of them and mix them together. Beige red being the one that I think mixes in well with all of the others in a way that helps create a lot of variety of skin tones and flesh tones, no matter what you're going for, because we're all walking soup bags of blood, and skin is to some level transparent, and it really just depends on your melatonin content. But at the end of the day, every skin tone has red undertones to it, and so I like the beige red to provide that reddish undertone to work from. I think it has a really nice kind of pair, and it works well for all the different types of skin tones that I've tried as kind of a mix-in. Again, it doesn't particularly look perfect on its own, but that's why we just kind of like bake other parts in. Let's go back to this really quick. Just reestablish our build here on this area. Give that a moment to dry. Let's go into a bit of this. I don't remember what this one's called. Beige red, standard. Tan flesh, I think was this one. So we have advanced flesh tone, beige red, and tan flesh here. And we're just going to mix these together to kind of create our skin tone highlights now. And again, making sure that we're keeping this kind of nice and flowy. Undercoat. So much like I did on the white suit, that initial layer really just serves as my undercoat for the rest of my highlights and base coats and everything. So most of it's not going to show through, but even though I'm going to cover a lot of it, the translucency of the paint means that you're still going to get hints of that under layer that's going to kind of show through, and it's going to tint everything on top of it like a transparency layer. And so it is really important to do this because it just helps pull all of your colors together and look more natural. And it saves you from having to layer on a ton of paint. Oh, we're sloppy today. Okay. We'll grab more of this brighter white, or this lighter peach, I guess. And hit these areas. Blend this color out. And so I'm just kind of like looking at like hitting the knuckles and then using my secondary brush to just blend that brighter highlight together with everything else that's going on. And I can increase all of that by just adding in successive layers. Come in here, kind of the forehead and everything. The nose. The chin, pull that down. And this is where your online YouTube makeup tutorials really come into play. If you're struggling to paint faces and you're not watching YouTube tutorials on how to contour with actual makeup, you're doing yourself a disservice, because that is a huge resource that effectively explains how you can make any face look like any face. So where do you put your shadows? Where do you put your highlights? What kind of colors are you looking at for it? It really can't be overstated how huge of a resource and a boon that stuff is, because, you know, our sculptors and engineers do a fabulous job kind of giving what we feel is a good amount of detail and facial features, but you're talking about a very small area. And one of the big things with mini painting in general is, of course, the idea that we're having to trick the eye or help the eye see what's actually there. So, you know, adding intense shadow and depth under the cheekbones and creating those kind of angular features. Sometimes you get a sculpt and the face just doesn't quite work the way you want it to. So knowing how to create those shadows and that definition can be really, really useful. And also just kind of like what colors you need to mix and work with to create those different skin tones and everything. I'm gonna let that kind of set up there. We're gonna come in with our bronzes here. Ooh, that needed to be shaken better. Let's come over and grab some work. Shake that up because that's pretty liquidy. That's really dark. So we got our bronze and our copper. We're going to use this bronze and mix it together with the copper to hopefully come up with something that'll stick a bit better. There we go. All right. And when you're working with colors that match or are very close to your primer layers, one of the things that I find really helps me to determine if I'm happy with where my highlights are, or if I feel like the overall composition of the paint job is coming together in a way that I like, is to just get color on all of the elements. So, you know, leaving these widow stingers white when they're not going to be white can really throw off how I'm feeling about the suit or the belt, right? Getting those elements of contrast and visual interest painted, even if it's just with a flat color, can really help you determine whether or not you're on the right track, or it can aid in determining, oh, I need some more shadow, I need some more highlight, all that stuff. So while it can feel good to just work one element or area until it's done, I do think there's value a lot of the times in just laying out your solid base coats on everything, especially when you get to a point where you're like, I think this is done, but I'm not sure, or you're in that ugly stage where you're like, I think this looks like crap and I should just give up. If you notice that there's a lot of unpainted areas, go in and knock those out with a single flat base coat color, and then look at it and be like, okay, now I can see how these elements are working. I can tell where I need more of that shadow, more of that highlight, more of that contrast. Maybe I need to change my colors, because obviously the colors that you pick for these different elements are going to play off of each other a little differently. One of the big determinations we got to make is, are we going to make her like gun holster and her little leather straps, are they going to be brown? Are they going to be white? And if they're white, what kind of like different shade of white are we going to use there? It's part of the reason why, not just because we had to wait for our initial glaze layer to dry, but also why I wanted to go in and get that Ultron bot at least knocked out in basic old dark silver, is having a unprimed gray white Ultron bot next to our white Black Widow would have been so much white that it would have overwhelmed the eye, and it made it really hard to kind of judge our progress on the suit and if we were happy with where our Widow was standing or not. So, think about those things, that your eye takes in the whole composition, and sometimes that composition is too much of one color. It can be problematic. Once we get that hair to stop being gray, now we're going to get that really bright pop of color, and it's going to totally change how we view that suit. And again, I'm not even going to bother trying to finish the hair right now. I just want to get rid of all that gray. If it's not supposed to be white, I don't want it to be white at this stage. Mistake. Clean that up. And this dark burgundy is definitely a very comic booky red hair, so we're not going for a natural auburn color. We're going for more of an animated comic style redhead, fiery, without actually being fire. We get to the tricky part, which is hard to do on camera, where you get under the hair line. Because I can't come off my little holder, or Tony yells at me. No, Tony, I know it's a trap. I've dealt with you long enough. I know when it's a lie. Wash away that mistake with a nice damp clean brush. Come back over here, grab a bit of this. And let's come back to our suit. And this is the other thing that, can obviously be kind of tricky, especially when working with thinner glaze style colors, is that they apply really strong, and so it can look like you've really mussed it up because they come on like really heavy and stark, but then as they dry and that wetness goes away, that sheen goes away, they kind of mellow out. So it can also be useful at some point to just step away from whatever you're working on, like this white suit, so you can evaluate what your actual color looks like. And in this case, we're still not quite as bright as I would like on the white side, so we're just going to add in some more of our white. We're going to continue to use that white blue as kind of our middle tone, so we're never going to go to pure white. We're just going to add our titanium white into that, and that'll keep us with a nice chromatic white. We'll avoid all of those pitfalls we've talked about with trying to paint pure white, because that's not how white works, and in reality it's just, and even in really great art, if you look at it, go look at some of the greatest painters of all time, go look at their whites, you'll notice that there's very, very little white in their white. There's a nice little like tinge, just enough white seasoning to make you think it's white, but it's not. It's some other color. It's blue, it's gray, it's violet. It's anything but white. And that's because white's super affected by the light source that hits it and the ambient lighting around it, all of that stuff, depending on the type of white that it is. So we're kind of to that point where it's like, okay, we're just going to start knocking in a couple spots of pretty bright white highlight. And that's what's really going to trick the eye into being like, okay, it's white. I see it. It's white, but it's not white. Not really. Not really. Not how we would think of white anyway. It's not pure white. It's really blue, just a really, really desaturated blue, starting with that faded ultramarine and building our way up. So overall, I'm pretty happy with where our widow suit has shaken out. So I think we're pretty much done with this stage, at least until it dries and I get a little bit of a better sense of where we're at. But overall, I think we're very, very close to done on this, at least as far as the suit goes. And obviously we can see all those other colors going on. So yeah, you keep a demerits list. So let's say we want to do white straps on the legs. I'm going to go in and I'm going to use this ivory color. And we'll just kind of like ivory up. And we could do this for the boots too if we wanted the boots to be a bit different. But I kind of like the idea that even though the boots are a separate element, that they're the same material as the suit itself. But it's no different than when painting, you know, when we painted Red Skull, we had like 3 different chromatic blacks. We can have multiple different chromatic whites, and each of those will add a bit of visual interest and help identify the separate elements that are going on here for the eye to read and make the overall composition not just like flat and boring. And one of the things that I really like about the Monument paints is that you have a lot of different white elements that are available. So we've got dark ivory, ivory, and bright ivory, which the color we're using for the straps right now is ivory. Then you've got dark warm gray, neutral warm gray, and bright warm gray. And then you have just dark gray, neutral gray, and bright gray. So there's a ton of different, effectively, whites just right there that you can start using to play with for different tones. And that doesn't even go into like all of the other colors, like the blue white, which we used on this Widow with the faded ultramarine and stuff. So there's just a lot of options and opportunities, and they're kind of all right there, built in these nice little triads that you can easily identify and start playing with and experimenting with, especially if you've not done a lot of it before. And I really like the coverage of those colors, their opacity, and kind of their final look. So we talked a little bit about how I struggle with finding a good skin tone right out of the bottle with this line, but when it comes to painting brighter colors or lighter colors, I find it makes it really easy and fun to do. Do we have to get this part of the strap? We do. And then obviously we would need to do a little shadow wash on this color and then build it back up to get our shadow and highlight, or we could build it up from here using the bright ivory for sure if we wanted to, just kind of depending on how white we wanted that to go. Can I find the bright ivory really quick? Bright ivory. How much different that is. Or is this the one I used? No, it's a little different. And we can come in, grab this. And just really quick, do a bright white highlight for this. And honestly, this probably needs an extra base coat layer because it's a little streaky, but that's okay. We're just kind of doing this for visual demonstration here, because we don't have any shadow in there, and that's going to hurt us as well. We kind of need that contrast that we're missing. But it'll get the point across that you can paint a lot of things white, but if you change the value and kind of color of your off-white, you can get very different leaning stuff. And so, we could have done the whole suit in this ivory color instead of the blue. It would have been a warmer suit rather than a colder suit. So blue is a very cool color, so it makes us think of winter. That's why I like it. for that kind of application. It makes it feel very snowy, very Arctic. Whereas the yellow in that ivory is a warmer color, so then it feels less chill, less cool. And those are the decisions that you get to make as you pick your colors. And they're really important decisions to make because it changes the overall feel of your piece. And it can really dramatically affect the ambiance and the setting. The attitude, all that stuff. So knowing, do you want a warm white, a cool white, maybe something that's a bit more neutral white, all those things are possible. And you're going to get very different outcomes and finished effects based on those choices. And it's, of course, going to affect what colors you're going to pick for your mixes and your highlights and everything. You don't want to necessarily mix a warm ivory in with your blue white. That yellow and blue is going to create a green. So you can play with that, obviously, but you have to be pretty intentional. It has to be something that you want before you get that, and your colors will mix. Again, remember their paint is translucent. It's not completely opaque. So if you go in and you put a yellow on top of a blue, that transparency is going to give you a greenish hue, a greenish tinge. It might not be like green, right? It's not going to look like a traffic light. But your eye is going to read those colors together. It's going to see their mix. And you can use that cleverly to create different colors and stuff. Obviously, it's a big part of painting with transparencies and layers, and that's a whole different technique that we've done once or twice on the stream before. And it can be used to really great effect. It's how your complementary colors create good shadows, green and red, intermixing with each other. So putting a green glaze over your reddish skin tone will tone it down and create a natural looking hue to the flesh. And it's something I think Dallas has covered a few times in some of his painting streams and classes where he's talked about how to create natural flesh tones, but doing red and green glazes to cancel each other out can really make a huge difference in creating a natural looking skin tone. So, there are no rules in art. There are kind of like lessons or guidelines, but the guidelines only exist to get you started, and then once you understand the rules, really that understanding leads to you just breaking them, but knowing what the consequences are going to be and using those consequences to your advantage. And that's one of the really cool things, and why we try to teach, or at least show on our streams, technique rather than necessarily a step-by-step process. So we want you to take the techniques or the ideas, hopefully get you so you understand like the whys, and then say, okay, but what if I don't want to do it that way? What if instead I want to do this or I want to do that? And by breaking or twisting those kind of standard things, you can come up with really cool stuff. But you have to understand the foundation first. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. If you want to do a warm, cool effect when doing white, so typically what I do to achieve that is I'll paint my armor in a nice warmth, like I would use this ivory. But then for my wash or my like glaze, my shadow effect, I would use a colder wash, so like a blue-black kind of contrast wash or an oil wash that had a bit of blue in it. And then that blue and that yellow would obviously mix together. They'd create a bit of a green and it would cool it down. But when you went back in and reclaimed the highlights, you would still have that yellow, that ivory white, and you could build it back up. So you can mix and match those both together because your highlight is what the eye is going to read for the most part. So we still have a bit of work to do on this Black Widow, but the suit for the most part is basically what I would call done, especially for a tabletop ready miniature. I'm very happy with where our faded ultramarine blue turned out. We have a nice cool looking winter suit for Black Widow, and we just have to finish out the rest of the details. So with that all said, thank you so much for joining me for this stream. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, 1 p.m. Pacific. Dallas Kemp is going to be back. He's going to be painting another character from the Earth's Mightiest core set. I don't remember which one. I think it's Spider-Man. Might be Spider-Man. So you can come see him paint the spectacular Spider-Man from Earth's Mightiest. And of course, I'll be back next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, for more painting and hobby in action. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I've been Will. You've been great. We'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.